Well, welcome back to World Religions course. We are now moving into the Baha'i faith. So we're going to take a look at that for this next presentation. I'll probably divide it into two parts. So we'll cover the first part in this video. Let me share the screen with you and we will get started. All right. Baha'i, the oneness of human race, and you'll see why when we get into their beliefs that's kind of a subtitle to them. And so the Baha'i are a very interesting group. They're an offshoot of Islam, but quite different than your Orthodox Islam. And we'll be taking a look at that some as we go. If you look at these symbols here, the symbol up here, this 9-pointed star, the number 9 has significance in the theology of Baha'i faith, of the Baha'i faith. So it's commonly used to indicate the number 9. Bahai's name has a numerical equivalence of 9. While the star is not part of the teachings of the Baha'i faith, it is used as an emblem for them because 9 has such a big significance with them, and it carries the idea of perfection, unity, and Baha as part of their words and their faith. And then this symbol over here, it's called the ringstone symbol, and it was designated by the great leader Abdul Baha, and is often worn by people of the Baha'i faith. And if you look at the lower line, it's said to represent humanity, this line down here, and the world of creation. And then the upper line, the world of God up here. And then the middle line represents the special station or manifestation of God and the world of revelation, which would be coming from their religious leaders that they've had. And then the vertical line is the primal will, or the Holy Spirit, you might say, proceeding from God through the manifestation to humanity. So, you know, the manifestation here is kind of the prophet idea, and they use different words, but so this vertical line represents that, and 2 stars are the Hayakals, represent Baha'alu and the Bab, and we'll explain about that as we go along. Here's a picture of the world center of the Baha'i faith in Haifa, Israel. You can see a lot of their buildings, and they're built in the same kind of shape, and it has significance with the number 9 as well. And so there's a temple that they use, and they have them spread out throughout the world. The Baha'i faith is a 19th and 20th century faith that came into being, and it's fairly modern in its thinking. It does have an official website. Not many of the major religions can say they have an absolutely official website, but they do, and you can explore that. There's a link to that. Baha'i faith emerged from the Shia division of Islam, which followed Ali, Muhammad's son-in-law. And of course, in their faith, the imams, if you remember, we talked about this, that they are inspired. So when they rule on something in the Quran or anything else, they are considered inspired. This is what they call nas, inspiration. And it was the same thing as Muhammad had. And so the 12 imams, if you remember, the 12th disappeared in the 9th century, and this is part of what we talked about earlier. about 874, and he's expected by the Shia to return as the Messiah, or the Mahdi, as he's called. In the meantime, they had been waiting for the Bab, meaning the gate or gateway, who was to come before the Mahdi and reopen communication with the hidden Imam, so that he could come out as the Mahdi. But some of these expectations have been lost over the years, but this is still one of the things that's considered in their faith. And this is where Baha'i is going to come into existence, is following someone who's going to claim to be the Bab and the Mahdi eventually. So you have Sayyid Ali Muhammad in 1844. He was an Iranian Shia Muslim. He came along, so here you are in the 19th century, they're still waiting for the Mahdi, and he comes along and declares that he himself is the Bab, the gateway. And so that's why 1844 is important. He journeyed to Mecca and declared this in the Grand Mosque there. For all his trouble, he was persecuted by Muslims because he had a revelation after Muhammad, which is not allowed. And so he was not highly accepted, to say the least. He called himself the Bab Din, Gate of Faith. And his followers began to be called Babis because they were following the Bab. But in what they, in their beliefs, they repudiated Sharia law, which of course would go against Orthodox Islam. Over here, you can see a shrine that was built in the 20th century to Bab on Mount Carmel, and so it's considered a place to really commemorate what he brought about. Bob, as the Bab, he predicted that he had come to prepare the way for the one who was yet to come, that is the Mahdi. But in 1848, he proclaimed himself as the hidden Imam, and this brought a conflict between the Babis and the government officials that followed Orthodox Islam. And but he was executed in 1850, and but before that, he was able to pick his successor, Yahya, as his successor. And so he's going to pass on and then pass this succession to this fellow here, Mirza Yahya, and he took the name Sub-e-Azal, Dawn of Eternity. And in the process, these Babs and followers were called Azalis. He wasn't particularly a great leader that galvanized the movement. So in 1863, the leadership passed to his half-brother, Mirza Hussein Ali Nuri. And so this guy will be the one that really brings Baha'i to a higher level of a movement with him. And so with him being the successor, he took the name Baha'u'llah. Glory, it means glory of God. He himself hadn't met the Bab personally, but the followers that would follow him were called Babis, but they're also known as the Baha'is at this point. He was imprisoned eventually and executed in 1892, but he was revered as one of their great leaders. They preserved his body for at least a couple of years, and then it's buried in Palestine in Haifa, where that building is that we looked at earlier. But he is the one that will really put the Baha'i movement into an organized, more organized religious group. So he spent a lot of time in prison because that movement was persecuted. He was imprisoned in Tehran, Iran in 1852. But even on his release, he was exiled to Baghdad in Iraq, which at that time was under Turkish control. But in 1862, he had a 12-day mystical experience, and this would inform him of some things that would be a part of the movement. In 1863, he was moved to Istanbul. So he's been being moved around in custody during this time. After the 10 years in Baghdad, he revealed to his followers that he was the one Bab had predicted, the one whom God shall manifest. In other words, he's the Mahdi. So he now is telling the movement that he is the one that the Bab had predicted would come. So he assumed that name, Baha'u'llah, and but of course, this is not Orthodox Islam, and it's, you're usurping the authority of Muhammad in the thinking of Orthodox Islam. So he's forced from one capital to another. He would end up spending the remainder of his life in Acre, a Turkish prison in Palestine, which is now in the state of Israel. But during that time, he had freedom for people to visit, and he could send out people to carry the Baha'i message to various places. He was known for his writings. He wrote letters and books. Some of the influential books were The Seven Valleys. It's a mystical work dealing with 7 spiritual stages: search, love, knowledge, unity, contentment, wonderment, true poverty, and absolute nothingness. Then Hidden Words is teaching on ethics. The Kitab-e-Iqan, or the Book of Certitude, contains many of the doctrines of the Baha'i faith. And then the Holy Book, the Most Holy Book, which contains a lot of the Baha'is' laws. He was known for writing to famous people, heads of state, Pope, and so he was highly well known, despite the fact he was being persecuted. So he died in 1892, but for 65 years, he was the authority of the interpretation of the Baha'i faith. And the heirs to that would come from his family. So after he dies, it'll move on to another person in his family. Abbas Effendi, who was the son of Baha'u'llah, he would be involved with this movement, and he became known as Abdul Baha, servant of Baha, or the servant of glory. He was considered an infallible interpreter of his father's writings, just like his father who wrote it was considered infallible. And he would carry on the writing traditions, but he too would spend some time in jail, freed eventually from the Turks in 1908. He traveled widely sharing the Baha'i faith, and in fact, he was highly respected. And so he was, honored by dignitaries all over the world. You can tell this by the fact that in 1920, the British conferred on him the Order of the British Empire because of his work of peace. Baha'i faith is a peace movement in a lot of what it does. It tries, one of its main tenets is to bring unity in the world. And so we'll look at that when we look at in the next video, we'll talk about the tenets of the faith. But because of what they did to try to help people and bring peace, global peace type of thing, that's why he got this special honor from the British. Shoghi Effendi, there's the grandson of Abbas. He would carry on after the Baha'i faith and would be the infallible interpreter as well of the Baha'u'llah's writings. But this is where you move into the modern period. He would, this from here on, you would have the Baha'i faith moving from one person kind of being the head of everything to a council. So he appointed the first International Baha'i Council, and eventually the leadership of the Baha'i movement is moved to this council in 1963. He himself would die in 1957. So when we talk about it today, we have to realize it's still a persecuted movement. After the Islamic Revolution in 1979, it was outlawed by Iran, where there was a good number of Baha'i believers. And so many of them were persecuted, their property seized, they were killed. And by law, they're not really allowed in Iran, although there are believers there. But they are highly persecuted to this day. The estimated size of the Baha'i movement is about 6 million. They are organized now by various councils, and this is a picture over here. You see the seat of the House of Justice in Haifa, Israel. And this is the High Council for making decisions, and they are actually now the infallible interpreters of the Baha'i faith. And we'll talk about that some more here in a second. There are basically three levels in the Baha'i faith, in how they're organized. You got the local spiritual assemblies of 9 or more adults, and they select 9 members for the administrative body. Of these locals, in 1993, there was 20,000 local assemblies. But then, like in the United States, you'd have a bunch of local assemblies. Like we saw a slide at the very beginning was a slide of one in Chicago, one of their buildings in Chicago there, one of their temples. And, so they have an assembly there, a local assembly there, but they also have national assemblies. So they select 9 members, are elected at the national conventions. And so at that time, national assemblies was 165 in 1993. And then you got the third level, which is the highest level, the Universal House of Justice that we just saw the picture of. Or out of all the national assemblies, there's eventually 9 people are elected. So notice the number 9 keeps coming up all the time, and that's because it's their number of perfection. And so you see this 999 in a lot of things. And these who are elected to the Universal House of Justice, they serve for 5 years. So it's a fairly democratic system of how they select their leaders, much like a lot of things in modern government today in democratic countries. So the leadership today has the upper level with the 9 members of the Universal House of Justice, this place here, and they're in charge of the publication of books and documents, and these that are published are authoritative, but because they are published by the Universal House of Justice. They do make legislative decisions, and whatever they decide related to their faith is considered infallible by those in the Baha'i movement. It is empowered to legislate on matters that are not addressed in Baha'is holy writings, but they don't appear to do this very often. So they basically go back to the original writings, but very rarely legislate something outside of those. But they do have the ability to do that. They're very missionary minded. They do try to propagate the Baha'i faith, and it is, in a lot of ways, it has a lot of appealing things because it really tries to help humanity. in what they teach. And so just to kind of summarize what happens with the Universal House of Justice, and this will be after this we'll move into the Baha'is' beliefs, but we'll do that on a separate video. This Universal House of Justice provides direction for the worldwide Baha'i community. And they do this in a number of ways. They have multi-year plans that they announce and they have annual meetings and give out annual messages, particularly during the Ridvan Festival, which is a 12-day festival commemorating Baha'u'llah's declaration that he was the manifestation of God. And so they have these particular time periods where they might make special announcements and so forth, but they can announce at any time. It focuses attention in the media about the systematic persecution of the Baha'i, for example, in Iran. So they're responsible for getting that information out to the world. Their messages focus on increasing the number of local spiritual assemblies. So they are evangelistic. They do want to have more followers in the Baha'i faith. And so they establish Baha'i centers and Baha'i houses of worship. And so they're very active in that area. They translate Baha'i literature. For example, they do publish their literature, their holy writings, in other languages so people can read them, because they are, getting followers from different countries. They also hold international conferences where others from other countries can be involved. Some of the things they're highly known for is developing educational programs to enhance literacy. They're very, very active in that kind of thing. They're also concerned that about the role of women, that they should have a higher status than is normally allowed in some aspects of Islam. They believe in enhancing the spirituality for children and youth. Really push good family life, and they're very much in social and economic development and various things like that. And so, when you talk with them, they'll mainly talk about, the important things to do in this world right now and what the Baha'i faith likes to center on. And we'll see this some more as we get into the next section, which will be on the Baha'is' belief. But for now, we'll cut this one off here, and we'll pick up on the next video on the beliefs of the Baha'i movement. So I'll see you in the next video.